Hey, hi everyone, and a warm welcome to today's webinar, which is an introduction to the science of reading. So just before we jump into the theory behind the science of reading, let me introduce myself. I'm Caroline Hardesty. I'm a Sounds Right trainer, and prior to joining Sounds Right, I was a primary school teacher in the northeast of the UK, where I'm based, for almost 20 years. I was phonics lead in my school and was responsible for the implementation and monitoring of the Sounds Right approach throughout school. And I also taught Sounds Right in my own year one class and have taught it as an intervention to various different year groups. So I'm just going to start with a quick introduction to Sounds Right. Sounds Right is a linguistic phonics program which is fully aligned with the science of reading. The program was written by teachers for teachers over 20 years ago. And in that time has successfully trained and supported thousands of educators all over the world. So many of us who've worked in school settings will know that poor literacy is associated with negative outcomes in later life, with many research papers highlighting links with poor physical and mental health, reduced access to job opportunities, increased risk of incarceration even. So that's why we're really passionate about our mission to improve the life chances of children by ensuring that they become proficient readers and writers. So we believe that teachers' knowledge is key to achieving that mission. So we provide top quality evidence-informed training for educators to teach reading and spelling effectively. Now, the science of reading has become a large topic of discussion in the world of literacy education, and many phonics and reading programs now are shifting their approach to align with the science of reading. But as educators tasked with choosing a reading or phonics program, can we fully explain how a program based on the science of reading supports more effective learning for students? Can we spot whether a program stays true to the theory and the evidence that the science of reading offers? So we've organised this free webinar so that educators across the world can access free content about the science of reading and feel truly informed and confident about making decisions about phonics programs and resources that will positively impact their reading instruction in the future. So this is an introduction to the science of reading, but we will still cover a substantial amount of theory in the session. But don't worry, a recording will be available, so you can revisit the content if you wish to later. As Jill said, there will be time for questions at the end. If you do think of a question as we go along, please feel free to pop it into the chat. I won't stop during the presentation to make sure that we can cover everything that we want to within the time, but Jill will answer some questions as we go along, and then we will also answer some at the end of the session. So lots of phonics programs say they are based on the science of reading. So what actually is the science of reading, and why do we believe that Sounds Right is as a linguistic phonics program aligns most closely with it? So in this webinar, we're going to consider two main questions. So what is the science of reading? And also, how does the English writing system work? And then we'll conclude just by talking briefly about some of the ways in which the science of reading is embedded within the Sounds Right program. So the science of reading refers to a vast, comprehensive, interdisciplinary body of research that integrates findings from cognitive psychology, from neuroscience, and from educational research to understand how reading and indeed writing can be taught effectively. It's not a single theory, but it's rather a collection of research findings that enhance our understanding of how we learn to read, and how we can teach students to read most effectively. So insights from cognitive psychology allow us to understand how we learn and how we learn to read. Insights from neuroscience describe the brain's structure and function in relation to how we learn to read. And insights from education focus on the practical application of evidence-informed teaching strategies. So the science of reading matters because it provides a robust evidence base for teaching reading effectively, so that all students, regardless of their starting point, receive instruction that maximizes their potential for success at reading. So let's look a little bit deeper into some of those insights from cognitive psychology, from neuroscience, and from education. So insights from cognitive psychology illuminate how we learn to read by exploring those key cognitive processes that are essential for learning to read. So research highlights the roles of phonemic awareness, mapping sound to print and print to sound, and working memory. So phonemic awareness, to start with, involves the ability to recognise and manipulate the sounds of spoken language. So, for example, segmenting cat into the sounds k, a, t, or breaking down a much longer word, catastrophic, into its syllables, ka-ta-stro-thic. Sound to print mapping refers to the process of connecting sounds to their spellings and then storing these connections in long-term memory. So, for instance, learning that the sound A can be represented by AI in rain, AY in play, and EA in steak, amongst others, helps in automating reading and spelling skills. And then working memory allows us to store briefly and manipulate verbal and auditory information. So research in cognitive psychology proposes that educators can support students in developing these cognitive processes. So, for example, educators can help students develop their phonemic awareness through activities that involve segmenting, blending, and manipulating phonemes. They can support the development of sound to print mapping through explicit phonics instruction. Educators can also help students by teaching them how to break information into smaller, manageable chunks, like chunking words into syllables for reading and writing, through the use of visual aids like sound spelling posters and charts, and through familiarising students with those structured routines to help them develop planning and organisational skills. Cognitive psychology also highlights the role of automaticity in reading. So automaticity refers to the ability to perform reading tasks with little conscious effort. And that then allows cognitive resources to be freed up for higher level processes such as comprehension. So, for instance, once a reader has mastered the recognition of sound spelling correspondences in the context of words through practice, they can recognise these words quickly and efficiently. And this automaticity in word recognition is, of course, crucial for fluent reading and is developed through extensive practice and repetition. When students achieve that automaticity, they're then better able to focus on understanding and interpreting text rather than saying the sounds and reading each word individually. So supporting students with this development of automaticity begins with phonics instruction, teaching students sound spelling correspondences and facilitating the practice of segmenting, blending, and manipulating sounds with that repeated practice so that they can achieve that mastery of the phonemic awareness skills. So as repetition is a key strategy for building automaticity, students should be supported with moving from saying the sounds and reading the words to simply saying the word. And this practice might take place at the word level initially, before then building up and moving to sentence or text level. Exercises like choral reading, echo reading, and repeated reading, where students receive immediate feedback at the point of error, provide students with targeted practice to improve their accuracy and speed, also contributing then to the development of automaticity. The student should always be encouraged to read for meaning. So while the primary focus of automaticity is on word recognition, the goal of reading is always reading comprehension rather than simply reading with accuracy and speed. So therefore, students should be encouraged to reflect on what they've read and should engage with questions about text from the beginning stages of learning to read. Teachers can use decodable text to support students in developing automaticity. The benefit of decodable text is that they can be closely matched to the student's phonic knowledge, matched to the sounds and spellings they've been introduced to and have practiced. This then means that the student will be set up for success. They'll then be able to decode the majority of words in the text with little adult intervention. And this then means that there should be fewer errors and error corrections, so the student can focus on developing their speed and accuracy in their reading. Another insight from cognitive psychology is schema theory, which refers to the cognitive framework that helps individuals organise and interpret information based on their prior knowledge and experiences. So as an example, have a look at the images on the screen. What are all of these? Now, at first glance, you might have thought fish. And if you asked a young child, they might well say that. But on closer inspection, there is an odd one out, the whale. And I'm sure if I asked you, you could point out what, why the whale is not a fish, and also the characteristics that help you differentiate fish from mammals. And that's because you've built up a schema for this knowledge from what you learned at school, or maybe through reading or watching nature programs on TV and so on. So knowledge is stored in long-term memory. In cognitive structures, we often refer to as schemas. And schemas can be thought of as organized or interconnected elements of knowledge, which include concepts, facts, and skills. So in other words, it's everything we know about something and how it's all related. And schemas can also consist of other schemas within them as well. So in the context of reading, schema theory proposes that readers use existing mental structures or schemas to make sense of new information encountered in text. So for example, when reading a story about a birthday party, a reader activates their schema for birthday parties. So it might include things like cake, gifts, and celebration, for example, in order to better understand and then predict the content of the narrative. This process allows for more efficient reading and comprehension by linking new information to familiar concepts and expectations. And schema theory highlights the importance of background knowledge when interpreting text. In the context of phonics, schema theory is also important as it helps to explain how students learn to read and write words by connecting new knowledge to what they already know. So students create and refine schemas related to sound spelling correspondences, and the schemas become more sophisticated as students are exposed to more examples through practice. So students begin by forming basic schemas for individual phonemes, understanding that each sound corresponds to certain letters or letter combinations. So for example, they'll have a schema for spelling the sound k, and that might begin with the spelling C, but might then later include the spelling K or CK. To teach phonics with schema theory in mind, educators should use scaffolded instruction and start with simple sound spelling correspondences before gradually introducing alternative spellings and more complex patterns, so building up that schema. And educators should introduce these spellings in familiar contexts. So in the case of phonics, this is in the context of whole words and words in text, rather than teaching spellings in isolation. Educators should also provide repeated exposure to sound spelling correspondences and encourage practice through reading and writing activities. They should encourage generalization as well by prompting students to apply their knowledge to new words and in new contexts. So all of these insights highlight the importance of targeting those key cognitive processes in reading instruction, such as phonological awareness, orthographic mapping, and automaticity, to support the development of proficient, fluent readers who can not only decode text efficiently, but also comprehend and engage with text meaningfully. Cognitive load theory explores how the human brain processes information and how instructional design can optimize learning. So very relevant to cognitive load theory are David Geary's ideas on biologically primary and biologically secondary knowledge. And understanding that distinction between biologically primary and biologically secondary knowledge is crucial for grasping how students learn to read and write. So when we're talking about biologically primary knowledge, we refer to skills that humans are naturally equipped to acquire, so such as spoken language, for example. These skills develop instinctively and they don't require explicit instruction. In contrast to that, biologically secondary knowledge involves skills that are not innate and that require explicit teaching and practice. So as alphabets are at most around 3,000 years old, they're not something that humans are born with the ability to use. So unlike speaking, which is biologically primary and most humans learn naturally, reading and writing is an invention that needs to be explicitly and systematically taught so that all students, regardless of their starting point, receive instruction that maximizes their potential for reading success. Now, if it's useful to you, anything that's biologically primary goes straight into long-term memory. So long-term memory is that huge repository in which we store all of the knowledge we learn. Biologically secondary knowledge is much harder to get into long-term memory as it's first got to pass through the buffer that is working memory. Cognitive load theory suggests that working memory is both time limited and capacity limited. Effective instruction, therefore, needs to limit the amount of new information being presented at any one time, and should also aim to keep extraneous cognitive load, to reduce extraneous cognitive load, to maximize efficiency in learning. So Sweller makes that distinction between intrinsic cognitive load and extraneous cognitive load. So I'll just briefly talk about that. Intrinsic cognitive load originates from the nature of the information that's going to be learned. So what we want our students' memories to be thinking about at that time. Extraneous cognitive load is anything that draws working memory away from this important information. And extraneous cognitive load comes from the manner of the instruction and the way we present the material to the students. Extraneous cognitive load is minimized by reducing elements of an activity that are extraneous to the task at hand. So when applied to teaching word recognition, cognitive load theory suggests that we design lessons that avoid unnecessary complexity. So for instance, that systematic cumulative phonics instruction helps manage the amount of new information that students encounter, which then enables them to gradually build their understanding of sound spelling correspondences and recognize patterns that are underpinned by generalizations and also statistical likelihood. In addition to managing the amount of new information that students encounter, we must also make sure that they are given repeated opportunities to rehearse and to practice in order to enable students to transfer that information into long-term memory. By understanding and applying these principles, educators can then enhance the effectiveness of their teaching strategies, making that learning process more efficient and more impactful. And Professor Dylan William has described cognitive load theory as perhaps the single most important thing for teachers to know. So I'm going to move on now just to talk briefly about some insights from neuroscience that contribute to the science of reading. And they describe the brain structure and function in relation to how we learn to read. So first of all, neuroimaging techniques, such as fMRI, which is functional magnetic resonance imaging, have proposed some interesting hypotheses of how the brain processes language and reading. So for instance, when individuals engage in reading or phonological tasks, it can reveal which areas of the brain are activated, which has then led to the hypothesis that certain areas in the brain are responsible for language production and phonological processing. Another insight from neuroscience is research into eye movement. So this research reveals how readers' eyes track and process text. Rapid eye movements and fixations where the eyes pause help us understand how we engage with text through our eyes. So during reading, the eyes make quick jumps from one word or phrase to the next, with longer fixations on more challenging or unfamiliar words. So when readers are proficient in phonics, they can then more quickly and accurately decode words, which then reduces the need for prolonged fixations and allows for smoother eye movements. And this efficiency in eye movement then contributes to overall reading fluency, as the reader can focus more cognitive resources on comprehension rather than on decoding. Neuroscience also provides valuable insight from research in statistical learning. So the process by which the brain detects patterns and regularities in language input. So through statistical learning, the brain leverages these patterns to predict and decode language, such as common letter sequences or word structures. So for example, readers become attuned to frequently occurring letter combinations, which then enhances their ability to recognize words more quickly and accurately. So in phonics, careful instruction can then support students to learn what is the most likely pronunciation of a spelling, or what's the most likely spelling of a sound in the context of the word. So for example, students can quickly learn that when the sound O follows the sound U, it's often spelled with the letter A. And learning this sound spelling correspondence and this tendency allows students to read and write words like what, want, and quantity with automaticity. So altogether, these insights from neuroscience contribute to the science of reading by providing a deeper understanding of cognitive and neurological mechanisms that underlie the development of reading skills. So we're now finally going to consider the insights from education, which focus on translating research into effective teaching practices for literacy development. So let's explore some key strategies. Explicit and systematic phonics instruction involves teaching phonics in a clear, direct manner, following a structured sequence. So systematic phonics instruction teaches students about the English writing system with schema theory in mind. By providing explicit instruction, teachers ensure that students acquire those foundational reading skills in a logical and organised way. In addition to that, building a robust vocabulary is essential for supporting reading comprehension. So effective vocabulary instruction goes beyond merely teaching word meanings. It also incorporates a comprehensive approach that understands word parts, such as prefixes and suffixes and roots, so the morphology of words. And by focusing on morphology, students learn how words are constructed and how different word parts can then contribute to meaning. So, for example, understanding the prefix un and the root word happy helps students deduce the meaning of unhappy as not happy. And they can then, once they've got that, work out the meaning of many more words, even if they haven't encountered them before, so unimportant or unbelievable and so on. And then finally, using formative assessment data to inform teaching practices allows educators to tailor instruction to meet the needs of each student. So by regularly monitoring students' reading progress, teachers can identify areas where students might need additional support and adjust their instruction accordingly. This ensures that teaching strategies are responsive and effective in addressing individual learning needs. So for educators, all of these insights highlight the importance of a thoughtful, responsive approach to teaching students to read and write. Explicit, systematic phonics instruction ensures that students build a solid foundation in reading, while a focus on vocabulary and morphology deepens their understanding of language and enhances comprehension. So in summary, the science of reading represents a broad evidence-based framework derived from cognitive psychology, from neuroscience, and from educational research. It encompasses a wide range of studies that collectively inform our understanding of how we learn to read, and how we can teach students to read most effectively. And that's been quite a whistle-stop tour as an introduction to the science of reading. And having explored how all of these things contribute to our understanding of reading, I just also want to now look a little bit at how the English writing system works. So this includes understanding the historical development of writing systems, the biological underpinnings of reading, and how these elements interact to then support reading development. So writing systems have developed over millennia. So this is a little bit of a history lesson in this part of the session, starting from early pictographic scripts to then more complex alphabetic systems. So ancient scripts were primarily pictorial. So if we think about hieroglyphics, for example, representing objects or ideas through images. But alphabets did not evolve from pictorial or logographic representations. They were invented between 3200 and 3000 BC, and they were clearly really systematically thought out. So in terms of a historical overview of the English alphabet, the story of the English alphabet begins with the Phoenician alphabet, which emerged around 3000 years ago. The Phoenician script used symbols to represent consonant sounds. So this phonetic approach was transmitted through trade and through cultural exchange. The Phoenician alphabet was then adopted by the Greeks, who made certain cultural modifications like adding vowels, which allowed for a more precise representation of that spoken language. The Greeks' adaptation was then further refined by the Romans and their Latin alphabet, which began with 21 letters and became the basis for many of our modern European alphabets, including English. So initially, the Old English alphabet consisted of 24 letters. And by the Middle English period, English had undergone several changes and significant spelling variations. which led us to the modern English alphabet, consisting of 26 letters that was standardized around the time of the introduction of the printing press, which influenced the final shape of the alphabet as we know it today. So McGuinness argues that this process has led us to having 4 concepts that are central to understanding the English alphabet and how it works. And I'm just going to take you through those now. So the first is that spellings are symbols that represent sounds from left to right across the page. The second is that sounds can be spelled with 1, 2, 3, or 4 letters. So I'll show you some examples here. So you can see the word mop has 3 letters, 3 sounds, and 3 spellings. You've then got the word shop, which has 4 letters, but 3 sounds and 3 spellings. So we've got sh here being represented by 2 letters. And then we've got right, which has 5 letters, but 3 sounds and 3 spellings. And here in the word right, you've got the sound I being spelled with 3 letters. And then in the word wait, 6 letters, but 3 sounds and 3 spellings. And in wait, you've got an example of a sound being spelled with 4 letters. The third concept is that the same sound can be spelled in more than one way. So for example, we can spell the sound E in English in multiple ways. So we've got E in she, and then we've got EA in read, double E in greet, we've got IE in chief, EY in key, and Y on its own in happy. So lots of different ways there to spell that one sound. And then the final concept is that many spellings can represent more than one sound. So for example, if we take the spelling, the letter O, that can represent the sound O in hot, O in no, U in two, and in sun. So that's one spelling representing 4 different sounds. So these 4 key concepts provide us with a really clear conceptual framework for understanding the relationship between the sounds of English and the written representations or spellings of the sounds. So this aspect of the writing system might at first sight appear to be quite complicated, but if it's taught very carefully, one step at a time, it isn't, and it really helps students to understand the complexities of our writing system. And the conceptual framework is key to learning how to read and spell, and any teacher with good knowledge of this framework can teach students how to read and spell any word then that's likely to come up in the curriculum. So teaching specific high frequency words is actually less important than teaching the code and how the code works. So for example, if we've taught double consonants, like the double F, double L, double S, double Z, spelling the sounds O, S, and Z, and then the students came across words like egg or add, which presumably, you know, they would be very common words that they might come across in books or in the curriculum. All the teacher would need to do is then point to the 2-letter spelling. So for example, in the word add, we would just teach the children that this is just another way of spelling the sound at the ends of short words. This is 2 letters spelling 1 sound. And the same would then apply obviously for the double G in egg. We can also look at an example of the TCH spelling of the sound ch that may occur frequently in words that they come across or not, but it's taught in Sounds Right at the end of our initial code as a 3-letter spelling. Not necessarily because it's got value in itself particularly, but because it enables us then to teach the concept that we can also spell sounds with 3 letters. So up until this point, the students will be very familiar that they can spell sounds with 1 letter or 2 letters. And this allows us very early on to introduce the concept that sounds can be spelled with 3 letters. And that then opens the door for teaching other words that they might come across more frequently. So for example, the 3-letter spelling of in were or air in there, and any other 3-letter sounds and spellings as and when they occur. And similarly, the single letter spelling S that represents the sound S early on in our sequence, but when students come across words like is or his, The teacher will just teach informally at this point the idea that this spelling can also, it can spell the sound s, but in these words, it's z. So teaching the code within a conceptual framework obviates the need to focus solely on specific words. So a knowledgeable teacher will easily be able to explain in really simple terms any challenge posed by the complexities of the code in early reading and spelling development. So to understand fully how reading proficiency develops, we must also then consider theoretical models like the simple view of reading and also Scarborough's reading rope. So the simple view of reading argues that the goal of reading comprehension, which is ultimately what we want the students to achieve, is the product of two key components. So the first being decoding, knowing what the words are, and the second being language comprehension. So knowing what the words mean. So according to this model, effective reading instruction must address both components in order to improve overall reading skills and to achieve that ultimate goal of reading comprehension. We've then also got Scarborough's reading rope, which provides a more detailed framework illustrating how various strands of reading, such as phonological awareness, decoding, and language comprehension, intertwine to support skilled reading. Now, the visual is quite small on your screen there, but you will be able to find this very easily if you want to go and look at it later. The rope metaphor highlights how these intertwined skills contribute to reading fluency and comprehension, and really emphasizes that, the complexity and most importantly, the interdependence of those components. You need to have both of them, word recognition and language comprehension, in order to achieve that goal of reading comprehension. So I just want to spend a little bit of time then considering the practical implications of what I've talked about, with particular reference to choosing a phonics programme. So the science of reading provides a robust evidence-based framework that enhances our understanding of how we learn to read, and how we can teach students to read more effectively. So this interdisciplinary approach draws from cognitive psychology, neuroscience, and education, and highlights the importance of a comprehensive and research-grounded approach to teaching reading. However, while many phonics programs claim alignment with the science of reading, it's really crucial to assess whether a program that you're considering truly reflects the research standards. So not all programs adhere to that really rigorous evidence-based criteria that's important and essential for effective literacy instruction. So when evaluating a phonics program, think about the following things. So first of all, the research basis. Is the program grounded in research? Does it adapt to new findings? Secondly, the instructional approach. So does it offer explicit and systematic phonics instruction based on a really clear understanding of the way the English writing system works? And then also inclusivity. So is it designed to meet the needs of all students, including those who struggle with reading? And by ensuring that phonics programs meet this criteria, we can better support our students' reading development and promote literacy success for every single learner in our classrooms. So I'm going to finish just to kind of bring everything back to talk a little bit about how Sounds Right aligns with the science of reading. And from its inception, Sounds Right has been based on what cognitive science and the science of reading and learning tell us about how students learn best. The science of reading, along with what we know about how the English language works, is really embedded into the Sounds Right approach. So I'm just going to briefly talk about how. So first of all, we work from sound to print. So we start from what the children learn naturally, which is the sounds of their own language. And we look at how spoken sounds in the language are then represented in writing. So as you heard earlier in the session, the alphabet code was developed to record speech. So that's why our approach is called Sounds Right, to emphasize that we teach from sound to print. We start from what the children already know, and we teach them how to represent those sounds in using written language. But it's not all about code knowledge. So as the code knowledge is important, and we teach that very comprehensively, excuse me, but we also teach that important conceptual knowledge. So we teach those 4 concepts that really help the students to understand how the code works. We teach them really systematically, so starting with the most simple and working up to the more complex. And we've also got a really strong emphasis on the phonemic awareness skills. So our program ensures that the skills of segmenting and blending and phoneme manipulation become automatic from a very early stage. The scope and sequence of Sounds Right was written with cognitive load and also schema theory in mind. So we work in a systematic, cumulative way from simple to complex, enabling students to read and spell from cat all the way to catastrophic and beyond. We have scripted lessons that also not only use language that reinforces students' understanding, so the language that we use in the scripts reinforces the conceptual knowledge that we want the students to have, but they also reduce cognitive load for both the students and the teacher, ensuring that all of the focus is on what needs to be learned. The scripts and the scope and sequence build in lots of opportunities for practice, including spaced practice, so you're returning to material after a period of time, and lots of repetition to make sure that students can achieve that automaticity and to embed their learning in long-term memory. And on our training, we not only equip our educators with the practicalities of teaching students to read and write, but we also ensure that they have a good knowledge and understanding of all the theory behind it, so the why. Teacher subject knowledge really is key here. And ultimately, if we know why we're doing something the way we do, then we're much more likely to teach it effectively and with fidelity. So our program really is based on that, that theory, and we teach that to our educators on our training. So that brings me to the end of the main content of our webinar today, and I hope you've enjoyed it and found it useful and interesting. If you would like to know more about the Sounds Right approach to teaching phonics, you can find more information about the approach and our training on our website. You can also get in touch there via the Contact Us page if you are interested in speaking to a trainer in your area. My contact details are also there as well if you would like to get in touch after the webinar. Thank you very much for taking time to come along today. And I would be happy to take any questions now. If you have questions that you would like to pop into the chat, but I will just hand back over to Jill as well, just to